Hello, everyone, and welcome to Belize Tourism Futures. Today, I'm joined by Mara Jernigan, a chef, culinary consultant, and educator who's worked in kitchens in Canada, Europe, and the Caribbean. In Belize, she has led culinary operations at resorts like Couple Tree Lodge and worked closely with teams at Mahogany Bay, Victoria House, and Blancano. She's passionate about local sourcing, sustainability, and helping cooks and chefs thrive in challenging environments. Welcome, Mara.
Hi, Lorenzo. Nice to be back.
In this episode, we're talking about why a well run kitchen is a foundation of a great tourism experience. Mara, can you start by sharing a bit about your background and why you've made this such a personal mission?
Well, I guess I've spent my whole career in kitchens and I've built a few. I've had my own cooking school in a couple of different places, and I've built household kitchens, including my own, and commercial kitchens, including one costing over $350,000, and kitchens with outdoor elements too. So that old expression purpose built that seemed to crop up a couple of years ago, it really applies to a kitchen because if you build it well, it'll affect efficiency, morale, performance, and save money.
Why do you think the kitchen is such a central part of a great resort or restaurant operation?
Well, food is a really big part of people's tourism experience and a big thing that they talk about afterwards. If the food was great, they'll talk about it. And if the food wasn't great, they'll talk about it. So, you know, what happens in a hotel room, we don't always hear about, but what happens in a dining experience, we always hear about from friends, we hear about it on reviews. So it's central. It's also, food is when it's done properly, it's the entryway to the culture. If if the food really represents where you are in your tasting place, then it's really your stepping stone into the culture.
And what does a well run kitchen actually look like on a day to day basis?
Well, a well run kitchen doesn't have to be really expensive, but it has to have the right things and it has to have a good layout. Kitchens are often very small because when they're planned, particularly in big cities, they could be put into an existing building, often a really old building if it's in a kind of a character place. Restaurant owners are very conscious of square footage. There's even calculations on figuring out how much money you make per square foot. So the kitchen is often kind of an afterthought. It's like the maximum amount that they can allot to tables. Like one table of two amortized out over the course of a year and turned two or three times a night can make a lot of extra money. So if you can take that extra 4 feet out of the kitchen and give it to the dining room, it's revenue generating. So, more and more chefs are getting involved in the creation and planning of kitchens, it is a good thing. But just being a chef doesn't mean you're good at designing kitchens. They don't need to be huge, but they need to be really efficient with everything kind of laid out. I'm sitting in my kitchen myself and you can't see everything, but, I have 20 utensils that I use over and over and over again. And most of them have accompanied me for over 30 years through my teaching kitchens and my studio kitchen. So you don't have to have the fanciest of everything, but there are a few innovations which can be real game changers too.
And how does good kitchen organizations translate into a better experience for guests?
Well, a lot of it equates to staff satisfaction and happiness and a sense of order. As a consultant, I often have to fix places, and I've walked into a lot of really chaotic kitchens. And I hate to say it, I've walked into more than a few in Belize, and some where the crew or the staff were really amazing in spite of it all, but maybe afraid to speak up about what they needed. Or maybe they'd never worked in a really nice kitchen, so they didn't know what they needed. And others where the morale and the cleanliness standards had really tumbled because of all these obstacles.
Do you think a tourist really notices when a kitchen is well run or not?
I think it's a feeling that translates because there's layers and layers of it. Um, I'm highly attuned to it. I can be in a dining room with the kitchen closed off, and even just by reading through a menu, there's a few flags. A menu that's really huge in a place that's not really busy. Then I start to try and navigate that menu to find the safe choices, something that hasn't been sitting in a fridge for a long time, something that's pretty easy to execute. Um, so there's elements like that. There's also, the service people are the connection between the guests and the kitchen. And when that piece is really running well, it's a beautiful thing because they are the ambassadors of the kitchen and of the food that's coming out of it. And the more they know about it, just a simple little thing that every restaurant should do is have a meeting with the service staff 10 minutes before service. What are the specials? Is there anything we're out of? Is there anything you want us to push tonight? What wine goes well with this? What cocktails are we serving? And so then, as I said, the service staff can really be the ambassador for the kitchen because it's not very often that the chef is directly in contact with the guests.
So you mentioned that a menu that has a lot of items might not necessarily be something good. A few people might think if I own a restaurant and I am able to have 30 things, 30 different options for guests, guests are going to love this. Why is this necessarily good?
Because you're going to have more waste, because you need more labor to prepare things, because there is an opportunity of things not being fresh. I can think of a place that had quite a large menu that was actually pretty good at it, and that's Victoria House. They had a bar menu, they had a breakfast menu, a lunch menu, a dinner menu. I think, yeah. And, they had quite an exceptional staff and a pretty good kitchen. Physically. And they were able to do it. They kind of had that fast paced northern Belizean push, 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 because it's been busy in San Pedro for many, many years. So they are a bit more experienced. But when you get out into some of the more remote lodges, what we chose to do in the early days, it wasn't Copaltree Lodge, it was Belcampo at that point, because the place had been slow. They didn't have a lot of guests. But the guests they had in the experience was really special, and we really wanted to take it in a new direction and serve really local food and food as much as we could from the property because there's a narrative and a freshness to all that that's just really something special for guests. So when I first got in there, we decided to go with a set menu and two different choices. You could have a choice of an appetizer and a choice of a main course, and then we had a dessert menu. And then lunch, we had a small lunch menu, decent breakfast menu. So there's a lot of things that are under consideration, the abilities of your staff. And I hate to say it, often owners and general managers don't have the intimate knowledge of the kitchen operations, and they're the ones making the decisions on behalf of the kitchen. I remember one place that had these night treats. Somebody listening to this might know what I'm talking about, that were left on people's pillows at night. And all the recipes for those night treats was found off the back of the sweetened condensed milk cans. And we went in and tried to do something a little bit more elevated, a little bit more, and just came up against a wall. The idea was nice, but you have to be careful putting sweets in the room at the end of the night because of ants and bugs in Belize. And it wasn't something, it didn't reflect the country, and it wasn't something we were proud of. So we wanted to make small incremental changes to that. And chefs can really get shut down and demoralized very quickly by being pushed into doing things that they don't feel comfortable with, or are almost impossible to execute. And, Belizean staff in general are very cooperative and will say yes to most things. But I think this is why sometimes consultants or executive chefs who have been exposed to guests in other countries can sometimes be an advocate for the kitchen. Another property I worked in, this was an expensive, elegant property, and they had no dishwasher. And that's demoralizing for the staff. And it leads to more breakage and more time and more labor. And, we were getting new big screen TVs for every room, but we didn't have a dishwasher. And then you get into challenges in Belize because if you're a foreigner and you come in and you're not aware of some of the, like maybe you need three-phase power for that dishwasher and you don't have three-phase power. So not every chef has the skills to really plan a good kitchen. And also, for that same reason, sometimes a consultant can be the bad cop and come in and say, hey, look, this is not okay. Because they kind of have nothing to lose. If they succeed at getting the staff what they need, the staff will benefit. But if they fail, they're just a consultant, but at least they've told the truth. They've spoken truth to power, as we say in Canada.
That sounds like one of the primary reasons why governments like to hire McKinsey.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
So, what are some of the early warning signs that a kitchen isn't being managed well?
Well, you can look externally and internally. Externally, sloppy food on the plate, long wait times, confusion, mistakes, a lack of management. A lot of managers like to sit in an office rather than be in the dining room, touching every table and making sure there's quality checks and checking with the kitchen to see if they're okay, expediting if they need to. A lot of managers would just rather sit in the office and be on a computer all day. And that, you need people that really are drawn to hospitality. On the back side of things, the first thing you look at is the fridge. Is the fridge clean? Is it organized? Are things labeled and dated? You look at the prep fridges that the kitchen is using. Is the food covered? Is it old? Is it drying out? These are really basic things. But again, if you have a manager has to be careful because often a food and beverage manager is in charge of the kitchen, but they've never been a chef. So you have to tread carefully and respectfully, but you have to know what to look for. And like I said, and also, the first thing you do is look at the food cost. So if they don't do food cost and there's no inventories taken, that's a problem too, But I've also seen kitchens where you have to go and find the stock keeper, the storeroom keeper to get a scrubby and fill out a requisition book. And yet beef tenderloin was kept in the kitchen where anybody could steal it even. So, yeah, it's amazing how people kind of get in these management jobs where they're responsible for managing the dining room and the kitchen. And they're, just wear nice clothes and walk around.
So, would your advice be to have different managers, one for the kitchen and one for the restaurant, being outside?
Somebody's got to take responsibility for the kitchen. Somebody needs to be the chef. And then the manager front of house, or if it's a food and beverage manager, if you don't have a dining room manager, then you should have a supervisor or whatever, kind of a lower management level. But somebody needs to be held accountable for the dining room. Somebody needs to be held accountable for the kitchen. And then a food and beverage manager needs to hold those two leaders accountable for their food cost and their performance and reviews.
In your experience across Belize, what are some recurring challenges that kitchen staff face?
They're not listened to. They have little pieces of equipment that they need, and they're either afraid to ask for them, or sometimes they don't know what they need, and their needs are ignored. And often their needs can be, not that long ago, we just ordered. Just to back up for a minute, when I go into a place, the first thing I do is meet one on one, or if it's a big staff, maybe two at a time, with every member of the kitchen staff. And I say, what do you love about your job? What have you learned from your job? And what frustrates you about your job? And you just write it all down. And most of your answers, along with like looking at the fridge, looking at the food costs, and reading the reviews, and you know what needs to be done. But, recently I can remember somebody not having enough muffin tins to make muffins. And so every morning they were getting tin foil and making their own muffin tins. But to get things in Belize is not always easy. And usually once a year, every property will do a big food and beverage, or a big order and get it shipped in. And I used to use Webstaurant a lot. But there are stores like Brody's, and like you would be able to get muffin tins in the country. But just take a look at how people are working and what they're missing. Maybe they're missing like cloths to take stuff out of the oven when it's hot. It can be that simple, but those simple things are really frustrating. And the uniform thing that we recently just addressed, that's really tied to people's self-esteem. You might have people of all shapes and sizes in the kitchen. Belizeans are proud to wear a uniform, and they wear it well, and they're often creased, and they're usually ironed and clean, and they take it seriously. And not everybody has a washer and dryer at home, so it can be challenging to get your laundry done. So make sure they have at least 3 uniforms, so they can come to work feeling good about themselves and perform their job. It's often things that basic. Make sure that you have a dishwasher, a commercial dishwasher. It's a better standard and more sanitary for cleaning dishes, and it'll make your staff's life easier.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned that also it would reduce breakage, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's one thing I did. For me, working in Belize, the greatest satisfaction came with helping Belizeans, helping give them new skills, helping them make more money, help them be more recognized. And there was one thing I did that I was particularly proud of. Sometimes a chef or a manager, it's not very ethical, but it happens, will get kickbacks. Or a chef might get a bonus from the hotel for getting the food costs down. Or maybe the food and beverage manager will get the bonus. One place I worked in, I went in and I would watch people cut. Everybody makes pico de gallo in Belize. So what's pico de gallo? It's onions, it's tomatoes. Well, one thing I've done for many, many cooks in Belize is get them good knives. There was a knife set that came with like 4 basic knives and a sharpener and a roll. And they cost about $60 each, American. And I would go stateside or order them and bring them back. And we didn't give them for free to the cooks. They had to pay for half of them, and the hotel paid for half. And they could have it as like a payments taken off of their paycheck or whatever. But good sharp knives that belong to you, that you take care of yourself, will save you money. Because people chopping pico de gallo, if you go around with a scale and see how much of the onion they're wasting, or see how much of the tomato they're wasting, and weigh it and show it to them, then all of a sudden it's like, would you waste that much onion at home? No. So don't waste it in the kitchen. But to take that even one step further, so give them the sharp knives and treat them like professionals. And then the other piece of that was, we would do the food cost very carefully every month. And for me as a consultant, it was my job to get the food cost down. In the month of December, on one property that had very high sales, we got the food cost down 10%. That's a lot of money in the busiest month in Belize. throughout the year, I think we got it down 8%. And probably the worst month, which is also the slowest month, we got it down maybe 3% because it's hard in the summer. Instead of somebody like me taking a food cost bonus, I posted the food cost, the percentage every month in the kitchen, and just a big number. This month of, January, our food cost was 32%. And any savings that we had, we gave a percentage that was divided between the kitchen staff. And I don't know any other property, even in Canada, that's done that. And it was a game changer. All of a sudden, people are watching each other. It's like, oh, don't throw that away. It's our food cost, because they were getting a bonus. So maybe every month they got $100, maybe they got $50, maybe they got $200. And if they didn't make it, maybe they didn't get a bonus. But the bonus went to the workers, because maybe someday they want to open their own little, cook shack or something. And then they understand what food cost is. So it's kind of one of the things I was the most proud of. It really changed behavior. And the hotel that year saved what they paid me in a year.
Wow.
So it's like they got a consultant for free. And when I left, they never had another North American chef.
Wow. And it compounds.
Yeah. And also because I taught the Belizeans, like, teach people leadership skills. And I'm talking about quite a while ago, because honestly, I think Belize has come a long way. I think there's a lot of fabulous leaders in Belize. But I mean, I started out in Punta Gorda when nobody had ever, out of a staff of 100, 45 of them at the lodge, the rest on the farm. The first year I got there, only 7 had ever used a computer. So things have changed a lot in Belize, even since I left. And I was back this year, or last October. It was a real pleasure. It's so nice to work with Belizeans.
Have you ever faced pushback when trying to implement changes in kitchens? And if you have, how did you usually handle this?
Yeah, of course I have. People that don't feel secure or comfortable, it might be their own issues, because maybe they didn't go to a cooking school, or maybe they resent a foreign person coming in. Maybe the management of the property doesn't give them a feeling of security. But people that feel insecure, they won't trust. And one of the things I've seen is people not sharing recipes, because often it's my job at the end. It's my job to document all the recipes, because I have to cost the recipes. And if there's a couple of signature things in a property, now they often have to sign something that they won't share them with other properties. Because if you're from Hotel X and you go to Hotel Y and you bring their signature key lime pie recipe or something, you're going to be in trouble. But sometimes it's because they think the only way they can keep their job is by keeping the secrets of the recipes, if the recipes are there. In particular, I've seen this with a baker. Yeah.
And baking is really difficult. So the more Belizeans that would learn to bake, it would be better for the overall hotel, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, cooking is not as scientific as baking. So signature desserts, like if you have a full roster of, muffins and baked goods for the morning and desserts, and that person is a very valuable person, because but I have never felt territorial about a recipe in my life. And nowadays with the internet, I mean, there's a lot of junk out there too that doesn't work. But it's always been a pleasure for me to share recipes. And, having a really good recipe book in a kitchen is an important thing, with all the signature things, all the things on the menu, because otherwise you have no control over the cost of individual items. Any cowboy can just, throw in 2 ounces of something like butter instead of 1. And things like that are really expensive everywhere now. I mean, waste is a major factor everywhere. and sometimes even more so in Belize.
So if you were the manager of a kitchen where the staff were not open to sharing recipes, etc., how would you go about convincing them that it's okay to not keep that information to themselves?
Well, as a chef, I'd share my recipes with them. It's like, I'll teach you my things, and it's not that I want to steal the recipe. These are recipes. If you're working somewhere, I mean, like I said, sometimes managers will make you sign intellectual property things that anything that you develop then belongs to the hotel. I mean, the only way to win people over, really, to win trust, is slowly, with kindness, and jump in and work beside them and help them in any way you can. But, some of these things that I've said, like a food cost bonus, a set of knives, nice uniforms, just if you have the ability as a consultant or as a manager to be like Father Christmas, do it. You know, it really, cooks in a kitchen, they don't want that much, but little things can make their life so much easier. I mean, there's a couple of big things too. And again, we're talking about three-phase power, but a game changer in the industry have been the rationale, like the combi ovens, which are very expensive. They're anywhere from, 28 to $80,000, but they really save labor, and they really, I mean, all kitchens in North America have them now because the labor is very expensive here too. And I don't know how to use them that well, because, I mean, although they're very user friendly, but I don't know if I've seen, I'm sure there's a couple of hotels in Belize that has them now, but it is a real game changer to use a combination oven. So it's an oven that can cook with steam or dry heat. You have a stack of pans. I can put in like 30 duck breasts at one time, set a timer, or sometimes it even has a setting for duck breast, and they're all going to come out at the same time. Or it cooks fish beautifully. And pans can be hard to get, if you're going to Spanish Lookout, to the farm store there to try, sometimes things are made out of really crappy aluminum. And so getting good pans, again, all those little things. Yeah.
The reason why I asked about how do you get people to share knowledge is because I do find that in Belize, people are very guarded when it comes to
Yeah.
sharing information. So I
Yeah.
personally would want advice as to how can we change this. I find it's a really big challenge.
Sometimes you have to do it with kindness. Sometimes you have to do it by example. If you're a food and beverage manager and you're not a chef, sometimes you have to put your foot down too and say, we're not serving anything unless we have a recipe in the binder for it, and really require that your staff have to, read all the standard operating procedures. And so it's a combination.
So, as a personal story, I can share that the way how I try to make sure that people are more open to sharing their own knowledge and experience is by, giving them permission to just take what is mine to. I'll give you an example. So, I have a popular travel website, and a lot of people visit the site. Over 3,000 people a day visit my
Wow.
blogs, and I've had people in the past message me and tell me, "Hey, Lorenzo, one of your hit articles, I love it, and I'm actually being forced by my boss to copy your article, and I feel embarrassed about this." And I would simply respond to them, "No, go ahead, please. Like, I believe in sharing. I don't care. Like,
Yeah.
even like any photos I take, like just take it. Like, just go ahead." Because I personally believe in the idea where to help build innovation, you need to share the information, and then it doesn't matter if you learn what I did yesterday, because today I'm already in the present. So
Yeah.
I'm continuously learning myself. So in a way, you are a bit you're behind, but then you're catching up with me. So if I just continue pushing because I know that you're coming behind me is actually you're doing me a favor by like copying these ideas. So I just thought that would be something interesting to share.
Well, that's very true. And there's a couple of things that leads to. Number one, not everybody from Belize gets out of Belize. And I can think of, I've taken a few staff. I took 2 of them to California. And these were people who had never been on an elevator. You know, like the things that I thought that they'd be really interested in. You know, it's like, oh, you know, let's go to this restaurant. We went by one of those, what's it called? A rainforest cafe. Do you know what a rainforest cafe is?
Malls.
It's kind of a tacky theme park restaurant, and it's got like gorillas and elephants and waterfalls. And we walked past one, and these were staff from Belize that had been in the jungle. You know, like they weren't talking about going to Bouchon in Napa, where Thomas Keller's the owner and chef. They were blown away by this jungle cafe. And it's like, what are those elephants doing there? They're not in the same country as, you know. So exposure is really big, and we can expose people. I mean, it's really great, actually, things like Instagram, because anybody in Belize who works in a kitchen can be on Instagram. And I still have lots of people that I communicate with in Belize through Instagram. And the other thing is, you know, somebody like you, somebody like me, as you get older, you become a mentor to people. So you're the messenger bringing things back. Because I find one of the frustrations for some Belizeans, especially people new in the hospitality industry, is understanding the guest expectation. You know, and if the guest said, oh, you know, we had this pasta matriciana in Rome, you know, even if you work for the Coppola Resorts, which has Italian themed food, it doesn't mean you know what that guest has eaten and where they've been. So that's where people like yourself, who's left the country and done so well, and you're so devoted to promoting it, you can really, you know, you're in a position of mentorship, and you are very open. So that's a very satisfying place to be, I think.
I agree, and thank you. The whole purpose of this initiative is actually because I recognize that a lot of people in Belize can't afford to travel abroad and see all these experiences of what makes tourism great. And also, some people might be too busy, like, to be able to like be ambitious enough to go on YouTube and learn about new trends, right? So
yeah, they might have a big family and commitments, but while they're at work, they want to do the best job they can. You know, depending on, I mean, I kind of push the limits of management to see what is acceptable. But again, you know, if I have management open, and sometimes bringing other people in, not too many consultants, but other people with expertise helps. We did that a lot at Copaltree Lodge. We brought in chocolate people and sugarcane people. And but, you know, what if you had a contest? Actually, we took the crew, the staff, I work on a ship now too, so I'm always saying crew. We took the staff of, at that time, Belcampo, because we had 13 department heads at Belcampo, all Belizean by the time I left. When I started, there were only 2. And we took in the quiet season, we took all 13 of them to Chaw Creek. And I think that's something that's widely done in Belize. In the quiet season, other properties will open up to host managers or other staff. So seeing other things is really good. I've brought one to Merida, but you could have a contest. Although I don't know how, like, encouraging a lot of competition is good. Another thing that I think is effective, I have a friend, and she's like my hero in consulting. She has a company called Blue Mountain Solutions, and she grew up in Jamaica, but she's Jamaican British and has worked all over the place. Just an absolute hotel expert. Her husband's a Japanese chef, and she has a great Instagram account and a great website, Blue Mountain Solutions, and does weekly, you know, your weekly tip for the week and everything. But when she takes people through leadership training, she gives them certificates, and Belizeans love certificates. So, you know, you don't want to make a certificate for nothing, but if it's legitimate and people have achieved outcomes and learned things and done well, give them a certificate.
And it also makes sense given how the world is changing and micro credentials are important.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just on certifications, I'd say we did the webinars last year, the Belize Tourism Future webinars, and a bunch of people got the certificates and they really appreciated it. I printed out some and others got digital copies. But the truth is that I personally would be able to recommend these people. If they wanted a reference from me, I would be able to recommend them because I know they started something and they completed it. And that in itself is a big deal.
Yeah. And took the interest in the initiative to participate. And yeah.
You learned, they took a few quizzes at the end of every webinar,
Yeah.
and they completed this over a year.
That's huge.
It's huge. It's huge. So just based on that, I know they have the potential to be great because they're interested, they're ambitious, and they finish things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Moving on to another question. If someone wants to raise the food standards at their establishment, but have a tight budget, where should they start?
Start locally and seasonally. I mean, this is where the experience of a chef really helps. Once I was in Guatemala and helping with the property down there, and it was a good property. It was an expensive property, and they had a big, beautiful breakfast buffet and on a Sunday, and they had salmon. And I live where salmon comes from, and I only eat wild salmon. And if I go to Guatemala, the last thing I want to eat is salmon. But there's kind of this, some people have the perception, it's like, and you know, Michelin restaurants at one time, it's like to have a Michelin star, you had to have truffles, you had to have caviar, you had to have a footstool for somebody's purse, you had to fold their napkin when they got up to go to the bathroom, you had to walk them to the bathroom. All these crazy criteria. And some criteria that doesn't make sense. If all the best restaurants in the world are serving caviar and foie gras and truffles, well, then what does it mean when you go to Alba? Or what does it mean when you go to Brittany? Because the best oysters are from Brittany. Eat them in Brittany. And so I think I've spoken about this before, but making people really proud of what they have. And British colonialism is very different than Spanish colonialism. They've both done some really terrible things, but I think British colonialism kind of made people ashamed of what they had. For practical purposes, it was worth it to move wool from England to Louisiana and then load up with red beans and bring like canned meat and all this stuff. So bringing these imported foods into, which kind of have historical context in Belize now, but these imported foods were more about feeding the resource extracting locals and providing ballast in a boat. So a lot of the work that I did in Belize was around making people really proud and aware of Belizean food. And I mean, it creates a narrative and it's always cheaper. Go to the market in San Ignacio. Take your guests to the market in San Ignacio. Get some jippy jappa and make it with local eggs and you'll blow people's mind. They don't know what jippy jappa is, you know? So local seasonal food helps to save money. It creates a narrative. But also waste, you know, that same hotel that I talked about, providing a food cost incentive to the staff. I like the first couple of days, you look in the garbage can and you see the outer skins of onions and everything. And some people get sloppy and put like, you know, a lot of weight in there. So if you go through, and it's a bit of a shaming exercise because you do it in front of everybody. It's like, okay, what's in your garbage can? And what's in your garbage can? And you weigh it. And then you show them how to cut an onion. And, you know, I've always done it this way. It's like, if you weigh my waste from that onion, and then you ask them, how many onions do you cut a day? Well, I cut 10 onions a day. Okay, so multiply the waste from that one onion by 10, and then multiply it by how many days a year we're open. And that's a lot of money.
So besides using local ingredients, what's one small investment under 500 that's made a big impact in a kitchen you've worked in?
The knives.
Oh yeah.
Because a sharp knife cuts things better and reduces waste. And I keep going back to an onion, but if you're holding an onion with your hand and you're cutting it and your knife is dull, your knife slips, the onion is thicker, more of it goes in the garbage because it doesn't look perfect. Chefs love to be good at stuff. Like we love to look at really nicely diced things or nicely sliced things. And you'll be better and you'll save more money and be more efficient. Get your cook's knives. I would say that's number one, under $500.
Final question. If you could change one thing about how kitchens are run in Belize, what would it be?
Well, I think I've addressed a lot of the other things. Treat each other with respect. Management need to respect the kitchen. The kitchen staff need to respect each other. There's some great friendships formed in kitchens and in hotels, but there's also a lot of meanness and bullying that can happen. And managers don't see it that much, but there's a lot of kind of backstabbing. Like, be kind to each other, because if you rise, we all rise, you know? But, you know, like I said, there's a lot of kindness too. Yeah. And treat your dishwasher with respect. Man, dishwashers have to work hard and take care of things, you know?
Personally, I would add that I believe people need more training in general. I
Yeah.
was listening to a podcast recently about the owner of Madison Square Park, the restaurant
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
New York City.
Yeah.
And he gave a really good example that stuck with me. And he said, football teams train 4 days a week and then they work 1 day a week.
Yeah.
So I was like, yes, it makes sense. Like a lot of businesses in Belize, they just train their staff when they begin. And then after that, no more training. Right?
Yeah.
And really
Yeah.
great places, they integrate staff training into the weekly schedule.
Yeah. Yeah. And we had lots of fun things like that we used to do at Belcampo. We used to do lunch and learn, and we used to have fitness initiatives. And yeah, training is really important. And 11 Madison Park's an incredible. Danny Meyer, the book, Danny Meyer's book, oh my God, what is it called? Setting the Table. It's one of the most inspirational hospitality books ever written. And everything you need to know about hospitality and running a restaurant, you know, is in that book. And I'll just make one little point from that book, from Danny Meyer's book. This is for management. There's kind of three kinds of workers. There's the overwhelming ones that overwhelm you with their good performance. There's the underwhelmers who just kind of get along. And then there's the whelmers, people who are kind of in the middle. And his thing was the whelmers are more dangerous because they just want to do enough to get by. And they resent the overwhelmers because they're going too far. Like, if you really want excellence, everybody has to be focused on excellence. The really underwhelming people will eventually get fired or quit because you've set the bar high, you're going for the standard. But the people in the middle can pull the high achievers down because they don't want to work that hard. You know, it doesn't apply to everybody, but that's on the management to hire the right people. You know, hire for attitude. It doesn't matter if they have skills or not. You can teach them skills.
My guest today is Mara Jernigan. Mara, thank you for being on Belize Tourism Futures.
Thank you so much, Lorenzo. It's a big pleasure. Anything for Belize. If I can do it from here, ask me. I'd do anything to help people in Belize. Thank you.